want to talk about kind of strange topic. It's about when a country or a place suffers like a major defeat and everything collapses, and the occupier comes in and has such a devastating effect on the local people. And this has happened many times in Iranian history, that it takes, after the occupier has been defeated, it takes the people like a good while to kind of accept that, hey, this is all over, and those guys, they're dead, and kind of go back to living in a normal way of living, or I don't know. Sometimes they acquire some technology or some things from the occupier that they could kind of say, hey, this was an advantage. Well, when the British were kicked out of the India, then the Indians got some railroad system, some roads. They acquired kind of like a democratic system. I don't know how it works in India. They say it works, and they became kind of tolerant of each other. There is a lot of Muslims and Hindus. They kind of live together, and also they acquired parliamentary procedures and some industries. But the British really creamed and raked the India, and they took a lot of their wealth and built themselves up. They became and while all this was going on, the inherent racism, the European racism, that was so ingrained in their culture and in their institutions. I was looking at some of the pictures of Indians that was supposed to be the upper echelon of India's society, and the way they had dressed, it was like they were dressing to impress the European masters, how much they looked like them. It's just like how the blacks would dress up when there was before 1960s, and they paid a lot less attention to how they looked. They were more to trying to impress, so maybe they get a job or could date a white girl, something like that. And then this ingrained racism, animosity continued somehow, and there were frictions with Muslims in India. Well, anyhow, that's just India, but I want to go talk about what will happen or what might happen if Israel gets occupied, which is a very real possibility, by like Hezbollah, and then to the communities of the Palestinians that had lived like 60 years under the yoke of Israel. Well, the way the Arabs and the Palestinians they live is radically different than if you go into an Arab country that's, you know, it's 21st century. Like if you go into Doha, or if you go into Syria, or you go into wealthy like Bahrain, or places where they weren't oppressed. There wasn't all this outside occupying force, and you'll see that the culture of the people is far more relaxed, and far more thinking is dedicated to solve their own problems, into commerce and what's important in life, and planning for future. A lot of things are geared or dedicated to personal life, or neighbor's life, how we interact with each other. They are not the Arab that live in under the yoke of Israel. So this is they have a culture which is like culture of people who have been trampled on for a long time, and then when it ends, it takes a little while. It takes I don't know how many years it would take, like 10, 20 years, for the people and the land to regain its original original character, which was Quds, or the Holy Land, were, were the Holy Land to Muslims, and many Muslims traveled there, and the their character of the Palestinians was they were kind of treasured by the rest of the Muslim world, which is a wealthy collection of wealthy nations. I mean, if you Iran or Iraq or Saudi Arabia, they're wealthy nations. They have a lot of resources, not just oil, but human resources. Iran has a lot of human resources. Same goes with Iraq, and it has been always a kind of a Muslim tourist destination for many Shia, and they call it Atabat, if you don't know the term, which means like all the imams were buried there. So I was looking at some of the stuff on Iraq, and I was kind of wondering, because almost the quarter of all the postings were about Saddam Hussein, and that what he did and how he brought all these disasters on, and it shows that the people are still in the state of shock and awe how to deal with this criminal, and but what hasn't happened is the acceptance that hey, he's dead and his regime is gone, and so are the Americans, and nobody wants them back, and nobody likes them, and this kind of is going to repeat when the Hezbollah, which I think will be the prime mover, occupies bits and pieces of Israel and moves more and more into Israel. I don't think it will happen through Syria. Maybe they will occupy Golan. But I think the principal agent would be the Hezbollah. And then also, to some extent, this might happen in Saudi Arabia as the Houthis push up, attack more targets in Saudi Arabia, and occupy more and more of those lands. But the disaster that the Palestine has been, it will take in the psyche of the people like maybe a generation or two to wipe that out, like and get rid of all these memories of this disaster we call Zionism. And also initially people will not believe that hey, Israel, it doesn't exist anymore because it has been occupied. There is no land that the Zionists can come in and say this is ours, because there's Hezbollah everywhere. But this will be very hard for people to see. But sometimes, like people who are visionaries or psychics, they can, or even military planners, they can say, hey, this thing has ended, but actually all the pieces haven't moved in there. Well, when the Syria disaster was going on, I could tell that hey, the ISIS is over. But I was far ahead of many people. Actually, I had the psychic predictions for 2016, and not everything came correctly in the times that I said. But I said that in 2016 psychic predictions that by the time 2017 rolls around, there won't be any place that ISIS will have a stronghold, which came through. I think came through like sometimes in 2017, but it wasn't as quickly as I said. It kind of dragged on, but well, there are some military changes and developments that have happened. I want to kind of note these in regards to Saudi Arabia and Israel, and to some extent to United States. Well, one of the developments is the development and distribution or sale of very sophisticated anti-aircraft batteries like S-300, S-400, and well, the Russians have even much more advanced ones like S-500. Well, I think S-400 can shoot satellites down, which is really high in the atmosphere. But they are really not just one system located in one place. They're like networks, and they kind of tie to each other. So this development, and also the development of anti-aircraft systems that Iran itself makes, like Bavar, and also sale of anti-aircraft systems like S-400 to Turkey and India. They make many planes that Israel has, and they had gotten it from the United States, like F-14, F-15, F-35, F-22. They make them obsolete because these systems see those planes and they can easily shoot them down. In fact, the, the the Israelis, they go hide under the planes, passenger planes or planes of other countries, and that's how they sneak into Lebanon, and then they bomb and then return. But there were incidences regarding this too, but then when these systems become obsolete, it becomes very difficult for Israel to defend itself uh, by by air, and then that's really important because they rely heavily on bombing other places, and then if there is, I doubt that there is, but they send soldiers. But also another thing that shows weakness, and I think this will be one of the causes, is that many Israelis are white, like Americans or Wahhabis, and they receive a better life, money, and life expectancies, and many of them are not really interested in warfare. And there is not such dedication as other countries like Russian soldiers or Chinese soldiers or Iranian soldiers or Hezbollah soldiers, and also not so many in quantity of soldiers. That's a very big weakness because you have to have soldiers. You can't just rely on Air Force to to do the job. If there aren't people on the ground to fight the war, then things could be very different. Air Force cannot win a war, a wide war, by itself. Well, they have some defenses against rockets, but then there are other rockets that they are stealth rockets, or they fly lower on the ground. Uh, then they're difficult to hit with the Iron Dome. And the Iron Dome cannot defeat volleys of rockets, like many rockets fired at the same time. They can't. And the other thing is that there is such quantities of these rockets in Lebanon, in Syria, in even with Hamas and Iran, that there really isn't an effective anti-aircraft battery that can take them all out. And so if there is a wide war, there will be huge retaliation. But I don't think that Iran will start the war. I think Israel will be occupied by Hezbollah more than any other place. And then the other thing that's very negative for Israel and Saudi Arabia, and also for United States, is that for a very long time, this is 50, 60 years, they have engaged in frequently bombing their neighbors, frequently engaged in warfare, frequently settling every problem by force. And the countries around Israel, there isn't any country that really likes them or is a friend to them, and this goes ditto with the United States or with the stupid Wahhabis. They used to go around and kind of, this is in the time of past caliphs, kind of give big checks and buy people off. And some places like Lebanon, the money was important, so they wouldn't take actions against Wahhabis, and they kind of spread themselves a little bit. But then their money is ending. Well, another factor is that the price of oil has collapsed, and many countries are switching to a cleaner kind of fuel like LNG, and I don't know where that will go, but their money has kind of dried up, and they don't have very many friends. Well, another thing that with the Saudis and also with the United States, it's just how much they engage in instigations and warfare. It just doesn't end. It goes every month. There's 3, 4 incidences of warfare, even if nobody is bothering with them. For example, I'm very suspicious of Saudis having rocketed their own or other countries' oil tankers. There were like few of those, 4 or 5 of those, and then the British, on the behest of United States, confiscated Iranian oil tanker, and then Iran retaliated. I mean, before the British did something like that, nobody was bothering with the British. Nobody was taking any kind of action, either diplomatic or nobody was harassing them, and they just went ahead and did something like that. That's the act of war. Well, then they were saying, "Oh, the United States told us to do this," and then the United States itself engages in endless sanctions and warfare, even when nobody's bothering with them. The same goes with Israel. When nobody's bombing Israel, nobody occupying them, nobody is harassing them in any way. But they are the ones that frequently go into Syria and bomb different places. They go into, the most famous ones that they bombed Damascus airport. Okay, that's a commercial airport. Even though they have agreement with many nations not to bomb or bomb near commercial planes, they still went ahead and did it, and they used the commercial plane to hide under them and then sneak into other countries. So they are the militaristic regime that looks for every opportunity for warfare. So at one of these junctures, things are going to turn aside and other countries are going to attack them, which is just the inevitable outcome. This is not something surprising, but it's interesting how these 3 nations, Israel, Saudi Arabia, and United States, they are the initiator of war. They are the one that, even if everybody keep in their best behaviors with them, they cannot expect anything but sanctions and warfare. They make very little effort to diplomatically resolve their issues or even not start anything. So I think that these factors that also another one that with Israel is that the way it has been engaging in warfare for such a long time is that many countries, many nations, they cannot live with Israel. Some country could be very belligerent, but keep their shit in their own borders. But Israel is not like that. It continuously goes out, instigates and fight. Well, one of the instigations that I saw was declaring Jerusalem their capital and inviting their stupid friends to recognize that, and then also at the same time inside their borders fight with the Palestinian local population and destroy their homes, destroy villages. It's like some kind of vicious animal that there is no containing this animal, and you just have to shoot it. I mean, that's kind of a very rough analogy, but I think that's with Israel. And also, I saw in the news that Hezbollah is positioning troops along northern Israel borders. I think these things will get out of hand. Another factor is that the prevalence of very sophisticated hand weapons or very sophisticated rockets. I was watching that the Houthis had acquired Cornet E missiles, which is like an anti-tank or anti-structure or anything. It's a big missile, like a Stinger missile, but it's used by one soldier to shoot faraway tank or a faraway jeep or something like that. And that I think this spread of these weapons we're gonna turn the tide in the ground, on the ground, and then there is a lot of anti-aircraft handheld, like similar to the one Cornet E missile, but it's directed towards planes. Well, I think I was watching one of the videos where a Palestinian Hamas, or was it Islamic Jihad, that it took out the entire bus that was carrying Israeli soldiers and was set the bus. I don't know how many of those, how many Stinger type missiles they have or they have acquired. It has been a very long time since the last Lebanon, Israel. Who knows how many of these very sophisticated weapons, either anti-aircraft or anti-tank. Also the personnel is a huge number of soldiers, very trained. The other factor is that there has been so much warfare going on, a lot of it initiated by Israel, that soldiers that have the best training and best equipment are not the same soldiers that have been in the war, regardless of equipment. These are combat soldiers, and they are deadly. But the other ones, they are just a sitting duck with very fancy weapons. Well, that's what I'm trying to draw the analogy. There is hostile nations around Israel with very good trained and also combat troops that have seen combat. They're not like regular troops. I think these factors will play a role, and this state will get occupied. But even when it has been occupied, a lot of these problems will persist, and it will take some time for people to believe that the Zionists have been defeated or the Saudis are gone. But we could look at history, and one of the incidences that was very important was the Mongolian or Turkish invasions, and all within Russia and northern Iran, there's all these mini nations. Like for example, I am from Azeri nation, and it's actually been split into two. One was the Soviets had taken part of it, so then when you look at these people, the Azeris and Kazakis, uh, they're not really a pure race. They're not. For example, Azeris are mixed. Many of them have Asian blood, which is like Turkmen or Chinese or Mongolian blood. It's because of the invasion. There was so much mixing of these nations. So, and their language is kind of pygmy Farsi, pygmy Turkish, pygmy this and that. Well, Kazakhi, the language is so corrupted. It's not Russian. It's some kind of original language the white people over there had, and then the people are kind of like mixed race, and also the Kazakhs are very white, and like Anatoli Turks, they're also very white. But I bet many of these people, they know that hey, we are more like Russians, we are more like Iranian, you know, we are not really Asian race, but many of the practices and cultural traits of Mongolians is there. Is because there was such devastation to these areas that, well, I think when Palestine uh, reemerges from all this mess that the Zionists have thrown them into, their culture might be somewhat like a mix of Jewish and Muslim. I don't know how their kids will look like, but there might be a lot more intermarriages once the Jews, the white Jews, they lose the political influence and their status or their monetary superiority to the local population, then the intermarriages and mixing will not be so difficult because the Jewish women would not be significant, would not be like a big deal for a Palestinian Muslim to marry a Jewish woman, because she would just be like in social status and economy, she will not be as important or more important than marrying a Palestinian woman. I don't know what will happen to their guys. I think many of them will get killed or run away. But women, they tend to stay in the same place no matter what. But I don't know. I think their future generations might be racially and even culturally a little bit like a mix, or might become like South Africa, where the whites will just go clump up in a little enclaves, and then the rest of the population will be all black. But there is too many white Jewish women in there. I don't know how it will work out. But no matter what, it will take some time to shake off the Zionists. With the Houthis and the Wahhabis, I think that something similar to what happened in Baghdad, where the Sunnis were they kind of very forcefully cleansed out. Well, a few years ago, I was just watching all the bombings that were going in Baghdad every day, like a couple of them. But there's just sometimes there is no coexistence, and even when they were kicked out to Anbar or Tikrit, the troubles wouldn't stop, and they became strongholds of ISIS. So some nations, some races, they're just too feisty and belligerent. There is no mixing, or they might be all deported, or many of them would get killed and the rest deported. I don't know. This is a kind of a sociological speculations. I think many people will kind of shy away from these because they really don't want to look at such a future. Well, thank you very much for putting up with me on my rant. Please don't be shy, leave comment, and I'll see you later.